Neighbor tell me the other day that I probably should write a lot of this stuff down. So as we get older, we have a tendency to kind of forget some of the things that maybe had transpired and so forth. I haven't done that yet, but I'm willing to openly share with you my experience as a COVID-19 survivor. Um, it was it was St. Patrick's Day this year. I think it was on a Wednesday, and by Thursday morning, I'd woken up with a very hoarse throat, and I thought it was seasonal allergies as I normally have them. And on By Friday, I was at work. I wasn't feeling very well. I was working from home. Uh, I felt a little feverish, but not much. And by Friday afternoon, I went and took an Advil, and I texted the doctor that I was going to at that time and asked him what his thoughts were. And he said, "Well, I doubt very seriously it's COVID because I was working from home, but stay quarantined, isolated, and get on Tylenol." So I did that, and by that night, my fever started to get into be about 101. Throughout the weekend, up until Tuesday, my fever ranged from 100 to 103, back and forth, back and forth. It never broke. I never had a sweat or anything like that. So by Tuesday morning, my daughter, uh, when she finished Alabama, decided to pursue an interest in medicine. So she went to paramedic school at Grady, and she does that part-time, and she currently is enrolled at Emory Medical in a emergency trauma nurse practitioner program. So she got in late that night because she's a part-time medic, and she heard me from the room coughing, and which I had been coughing all weekend. And she opens the door. She had her mask on, and she said, "Dad, I think you're gasping for breath." And I'm like, "No, I'm not. I'm just trying to cough up. It's a terrible chest cold." She said, "No, I think you're gasping for breath. You need to go to the emergency room." So in fear and not knowing much about the COVID-19, I drove myself there, leaving my wife and family here at home, and I went to Northside Hospital. I got there, and it was at that time when COVID had first really started to get in a lot of popularity on the news and testing centers. They had one in Marietta and one in Lawrenceville. Two of the nurses told me to go there to first be tested if I had COVID. Well, I was so full of fatigue and tired. I sat on the curb there, and there was this young man named Bobby Scott who ran out the door and said, "Mr. Page, you remember me, and I graduated with your daughter Amanda at Marist." And I said, "No, oh, okay." And I really didn't remember him. And he said, "I sit right here and let me take your temperature." My temperature at that time had reached to 104.2 or somewhere. It was over 104. And he called for a stretcher to come out. And from that moment, I thanked to God for him many times. Uh, I I don't know, maybe an hour or something after being in the emergency room. I mean, this young man, he got my clothes off. I guess he checked me in. I had recently purchased a new Tahoe and left it there in the U-turn at the emergency room. He took the keys to the car. He parked the car. I mean, he did everything. Um, I had this nurse named Ashley, and about that time, I started to gasping for air, really struggling. I guess there's a medical terminology for it, but anyway, she was awesome. She was very tomboyish like and strong will, and she was like on my count, on my count. So I really started getting bad at that time with the breathing, and so they immediately started yelling for pulmonologists and all that. And next thing I knew, they took me off straight onto the COVID center, and it's on the third floor at Northside. And I was there a few days, and I think they had drugged me a little bit, but I would come and go. I'd call Michelle, my wife, on the phone, on the cell phone a little bit, and my fevers continued to maintain at a high level. And by that Friday, I ended up AFibbing on them, and they called here at the house and told my wife that if they didn't get me on a ventilator, that they were going to lose me. My oxygen level had, at that time, even though they were supporting as much as they could, had already reached into the low 70s, or not low 70s, high 70s. And so they needed to get a vent, and I needed it now. And she's like, okay, it's 7 o'clock on a Friday night. And they says, oh, well, we're open 24 hours. We'll do it now. so they put me on a ventilator. I was on there right about 2 weeks. And during that time, there was a few things I remember clearly, obviously going into ICU. I always said the room I went into was not the room that I woke up in, nor was it the room that I actually, when I got out of ICU. So I was in ICU a total of 21 days. And in that time, friends, family, the church at Dunwoody Methodist was amazing. Dan was amazing. Everybody was that. All the pastors would call and check on me. And the community was beautiful. I had a lot of prayer visuals in the front yard. It was really a moment. It was just before Easter that it was kind of a moment that everybody was in the height of the COVID and getting used to this working from home. But more importantly, it was a moment that a lot of people could maybe I brought attention to the community about how severe this dreadful respiratory virus is, but people were becoming more cautious, concerned. The phone calls. It was very hard for any of the clergy at Dunwoody Methodist, like for David Melton or any of them, to come and see me, and it was difficult for them to even come to our house, and they shouldn't have. It was a time that was very dangerous, as it still is. It's a real virus out there, and nonetheless, I had a lot of beautiful nurses, and oddly enough, I really didn't know what all was going on because no one ever told me in ICU that my family could not see me and that people could not be there. I at one point got a little frustrated and upset over the fact that no one had called my cell phone and FaceTime me like some of these other people were being there in the facility. And I had this nurse, Jim, say to me once, Mr. Page, you don't want your family to be FaceTime. You don't want them to call. And I never really could puzzle that together until after, most of the time after I was out and really home, that those were the people that more than likely probably did not make this. And it was a time that you really didn't get full clarity while you were in the ICU or the ward in terms of why your family couldn't come and see you. So nonetheless, for many years, I had both of my kids went to Marist, and I always believed in if I have a kid or someone in a program or a school program, that I would be really involved. Like when my kids were young, Amanda's group, I taught from 2-year-olds till their senior year in Sunday school. And so I get really involved in the school stuff, like when they were at Vanderlyn and at Peachtree, and then they went on to Marist. But in the meantime, I attended this men's Bible study, Marist. And I really have gotten to know a lot of the priests over there. And jokingly, sometimes they ask me questions as though I knew Martin Luther. But I don't know Martin Luther. And as one said, why are y'all so mad? Can you not forgive and forget? It's just been 500 years. So nonetheless, it's been a really great experience because they're very and the guys that go there, it's much smaller than Best Man's, but they're very godly men, and they're led and faith and witness. And so, nonetheless, when at the moment that I was in ICU, there was an opportunity that this Father David that I've known for some time. Uh, I saw him there in ICU. He's short man, short and round, and he's got a very jolly little sense of humor. And I heard him asking for me, and and I could see him from a distance and so forth. And I just raised my right hand slightly, and he came over there. And in a very short moment, he said to me, he said, Randolph, remain faithful and know that God is bigger than this. And I just kind of stood there, and he said it again. He said, remain faithful and that God is bigger than this. And I thought, I wanted to say something else after that, and I never did. And these two nurses turned and said, Father, we've called security. You're not allowed in here. This place is isolation. And he left shortly after that. And he just left from the right side of me, and he was gone. So that was really the only person in the almost nearly 30 days that I ever saw that I knew, besides all these beautiful nurses. I had one experience, and this is a great moment to maybe share this in the height of all this civil unrest or issues that are going on. I had this African-American nurse. I was really frightened at one time. It was mainly because of the breathing struggling that I would have. And part of the sedation was because I was struggling so hard to breathe. And I remember her shift left at 7 o'clock, and she came in there and started talking to me about, was I married? I said, yeah, over 31 years. And I have a son and a daughter. And she was telling me she was a single mom. She had never married. She had a child, and so forth. And it was probably nearly 11 o'clock by the time she left. And when I look back and think of this woman, she really, I mean, she was doing her job, but she had God in her heart. She was really a woman that really cared about me. And I fell asleep, and as I woke up in the wee hours of the morning, I started asking for her. And the nurse that was on duty at that time said that it was 11 o'clock when I fell asleep, and she's gone home. She'll be back on Monday, because it was over a weekend period. And I always sit sometimes and think how I could maybe do something like that for someone else, right? Because she was doing her job and she was very good at it, but she went that extra mile. And that was a beautiful thing. So when I got out of the hospital, I was very weak. Just to give you an idea, I went from a men's 34 waist down to a 29. I lost 36 pounds, somewhere in there. It was over 35. I was I was completely on a walker. I had to have full assistance in whether go to the bathroom or to shower or anything like that. And if it was not for, I had a wonderful doctor. His name was Arnie Melitz. Some of y'all might go to him or not, but he's with Laurelette, and he's amazing. I always tell Arnie that he saved my life, and he's very humble. And he always says, no, I didn't. It was a team effort here. And it was a team effort. The doctors were amazing. And they always came into my room, and they would all be together, and they just appeared to all get along, and everybody shared back and forth of what they thought they would do next for me, and what areas was I having difficulty. And it always was with the breathing thing. So when I got home, I was really weak, but I remembered the nurse, and I remembered Father David. And I had a little assistance with oxygen, and that's not uncommon for COVID survivors that had the strand that I had. The strand that I had is, from what I've been told, is only 2% of us make it. So I, the phone rang and the house was full of flowers, guys. Oh my gosh. And the food. My neighbors, the Ackaways next door, I mean, man, Paige boots on the ground. They had meals coming to the house. Um, it was just, it was an unbelievable thing. I mean, you look at my Facebook wall and I think 1,000 people hit that thing. I'm like, wow, I didn't know I knew all these people. And Michelle and I are from Savannah, and one of a very close friend of mine who was my college roommate had said at the cathedral there were 6 candles burning over there. And the Jewish community here in Dunwoody were just amazing, because Michelle's taught aerobics over at the J, the Marcus Center, for 22 years. I mean, it was a time that people could reach out and reflect, and there were prayer visuals in the yard. Um, I was told there was a minivan of these Marist priests. They were fearful to death because the average age, I guess, over there is 80, and catching this COVID-19, and they were doing their prayer rituals and all this other stuff. So it was. I got home on a Thursday, and Friday afternoon, Father David called, and he would call because normally it was in the afternoon. All of these priests live there at the school, and they had their rosary and or prayer time or mass. And Michelle said, well, he's pretty weak. I heard her from afar. He's pretty weak. I, I'll ask. And so I heard that, and I said, yeah, I'd like to, I want to speak to Father David. So when he gets on the phone, he says, bless you, my son. I'm so grateful to God to hear your voice. And my voice was really faint. And I said, Father, I really wanted to thank you more than anything, of all the people I know. You risked your life to come to ICU to see me. And you have no earthly idea how much that really meant to me. And I truly, from the bottom of my heart, humbly thank you for that. And he paused for a second and he says, that was not me. I said, Father, it was you. You said to keep the faith and remember God was bigger than this. And he said, my son, that was not me. He said, and all of a sudden he starts boogering up. He said, I can't explain, but what I can say is when God went to the top of the mountain, when Moses went to the top of the mountain, he witnessed and saw God in a burning bush. He didn't see him in a golden tabernacle. He expected completely opposite. And yes, he was in the presence of God, and God was there in a bush. And then on the road to Emmaus, the apostles had no idea that they were in the presence of God. And he said, so I want you to know this. I don't know why God chose me, but I have served God for over 50 years. I think Father David's well in his 70s or something, but he said, I've served God for many, many years. And I don't know why he chose me to be his image. But the reason for my crying is I'm humble. I am so grateful that he did choose me. I said, Father David, I know David Melton better than you. And he goes, I don't know who you're talking about. And I said, well, I said, there's a lot of clergy in my life that I've known. I mean, there are a lot of pastors I know. And my mother, when I was a little boy, had died. I mean, why would he choose you of all people? He said, I have no answers for that. I have no answers why God walks in the presence of many of us and how he goes about to do it. But what I do know is I walk in faith, and when God is present, he's there, and he chooses how and when. And I said, are you sure you were not there? He said, I guarantee you I was not there. I said, but you know what's interesting is in that witness, I was not fearful at all. Quite frankly, I was quite happy to see you. He said, well, maybe that's what God wanted you to do. And you know what? What he told you is true. Remain faithful and know that he is bigger than this. And I, Father David and I have talked numerous of times after this witness. And I said to him, I said, you know, it's really strange. I've never gone out and had a beer with you. I've never sat on the side of the bank and gone fishing. I like to fish or anything like that. And he says, well, first of all, I don't fish and I've never drank before either. Now, some of my other brothers here in the house do, but he said, I chose not to. And I said, wow. But that was you know, people said, and what was interesting, I said that so many times to these different doctors because I'm constantly going to doctors, and I just started this week back working part-time, and you know, I've had some of them tell me, oh, you were hallucinating, you were on all kind of dope and drugs and all that, um, and I've had several tell me that they were Jewish and whatever I was doing to keep up, because uh, they said that uh, I think it was two of the five people on my team, two doctors on the five. There were five rotate. There was always a pulmonologist. There was always either one. There was always a pulmonologist with you, right? But infectious disease, internal medicine, and uh, Palm Sunday was the weekend. From what I was told, I really went bad. My oxygen level after reading my HIPAA went down to a 21. My kidneys started to shutting down on me. Um, it was really a mess, and the only thing that was working on me was the liver. So that was quite interesting. And so two of the doctors have said to me that they gave me a 20% chance to make it that weekend. That everything was going against me, and that I had maintained these fevers for so long that there could be permanent damage. But so Dr. Silverboard, who's a good pulmonologist, 2 weeks ago, he was smiling on the Zoom with me. I said, Dr. Silverboard, what are you grinning about? And he says, well, I've been doing this for a long time, and I don't know when I've talked to a man across from me that have sat on a ventilator for 14 days. I said, what's that supposed to mean? He said, they do 3 to 5. I may have had one 6 or 7, but not 14. I said, why? He said, well, they're usually in an institution or a majority of them die. I said, really? He said, yeah, really. He said, that was a long time. I said, well, why'd you keep me on there so long? And he said, because you couldn't make it on your own without it. But nonetheless, that's kind of really my witness. It was, and the more I think about that, God does come to us in little different ways, right? I mean, the black nurse that came to me, that was beautiful. It was simple. It was. I like to talk a lot. Uh, I don't talk a whole lot early morning at 7 a.m. Bible studies, but generally when I warm up and I have my coffee, I talk. Paul Rosen knows that. So I talk a lot, but it was a moment that all she was doing was just asking me about my family, and then I was curious about her family, and that for that moment really relaxed and calmed me, and I think that was God working through an angel of His, and the Father David. Now they can say it was drugs and dope or whatever, but I'm here to tell you, I did see that man, and he didn't come in a little cloud, a poof, or all this stuff, or a beaming white light. He was in his regular little suit, and he was very calm, and he just said that in a very Father David way at a Bible study. He says, remain faithful and know that God is bigger than this. And then when I did see him, I thought at one time he was um, kind of had that black hat, like maybe he was a Jewish man, because I heard the voice, but I didn't see him until he turned and came to the side of my bed. And you know, I think about all the things that they wear, and then I thought there was a man around the corner down the street. I waved at him, and I've lived here 21, 22 years in this neighborhood, and I've waved at him, and he's waved at me, but I don't know him. And my wife Michelle says he comes to his class from time to time. And I was walking on Trowbridge, and at that moment he waved at me, and I was in a walker, and I'm told that I have to have so much walking in a day because they like the lungs to keep moving. It gives them exercise, right? It's an organ, it's not a muscle, but it helps with the diaphragm. And his name now is Leo. I found out what his name was, and he's a Jewish man, and he's 91 years old. And he had told me that that they had been praying for me over at the synagogue on Tilly Mill. So you look back and you think there's a lot of good people out there, and they're just around the corner, and they're different in areas, and you don't have to see somebody or be on Facebook to find out, because you know Facebook paints everything perfect and everybody's family. I would never post a bad picture. So anyway, that's my story, guys, and uh, feel free to ask questions. Right now, one of the things I'll just in close, I guess, is say I've thought oftentimes, what can I do, and how can I give for God to be so gracious for me? And so I'm still a lab rat. I signed up to, I went to the Hope Clinic about 3 weeks ago. It's a clinic where what it stands for is just that, hope. Hope that they can find vaccines or cures and all these things that people will give of themselves. And so they called me back, and then I went back to Emory last week, and they took a lot of blood from me. What they're really wanting, more importantly, is a COVID survivor that they believe that there's different strands. A lot of young people are catching it and say, well, I just lost my taste. Some people catch it and say, well, it was just a really bad cold and it lasted 48 hours. Some people say, I just had fever for a day. And then some people like me just don't say anything, they don't make it. So mine is the one that they really want to get after and find in a vaccine. And I think what they're really trying to do right now is find a way to manage it when you do contract it. Manage it meaning that sustain it. And the reason for my kidneys shutting down, and I contribute that to Dr. Mellett, you know, he reads a lot. He's a really smart man. And he called back and he said, the malaria drug, get him off of it immediately. And they says, well, hold on, we need to talk. He said, he's my primary care. Get him off of it now. And they did. And in less than 24 hours, the kidneys started turning back on. So it's remarkable that my strand, I caught it. And so what Emory did is took this, come back, and this nurse, she's a little bit older than I am, had these tears coming down her cheeks. And I said, is there something wrong? And she said, no. She said, you have no idea. Your antibodies are so powerful and so strong. She said, we're not going to put this in the refrigerator and have the courier pick it up tomorrow. Because I went over there in the afternoon. She said, Dr. So-and-so wants to come in here and talk to you. And he did, and said that he's going to rush it over to the lab now. I said, why? And she said, it's what we're looking for. It's going to help a lot. And she said, we'll call you back for plasma. And then she starts wiping her face. She said, you have no idea the lives you could save. So I said, well, what are you going to do? I mean, you know, you take a little bit of the plasma and all. She said, well, best way to understand it is we'll get the plasma, and then we'll send these little samples to people throughout the country that are critically ill. And if you can visualize, and of course I'm not a science person. My understanding is that it will be put in you, and all of a sudden it will tell the bone marrow, hey, this is an antibody to make. While you're making the other ones, make this one too. And then the body will start populating it. And Emory's connected to like all these hospitals all over the country because I guess it's a teaching hospital. And that's the way that I understand it. So I'll go back after the 4th and hook up to a machine for about 3 hours as they filter this stuff out of me. I am A negative. They seem to be more A negatives getting it. What else can I tell you? One of the things that they made, which I thought was unique, they made my family do 3 days before, 72 hours before I was going to be discharged, everyone around me, my son and daughter and wife, everybody had to get to a 1,500 milligram of vitamin C a day and 5,000 milligram of vitamin D. And there was no exceptions at all. Otherwise, I would not come home. They were very passionate about that. Oddly enough, I'm the only one that has A negative. I'm a male and I'm 57 years old. And it seemed like the ward was full of the 50-year-olds. I didn't see a lot of old people that they talk about on TV land. I saw probably there were more African Americans in there than I was. And I saw from 30-year-olds to 40-year-olds, and the rest would be 50-year-olds or 60s. But I didn't see 70 and 80s and all that they talk about. And I was the first. I mean, it was packed in there when they had me. I mean, it was showtime. They were, that one wing I was on, they were full. Because I remember I needed help with one of the nurses. He was a nice young man, and played baseball for East Cobb, and we talked about all that and so forth, because I like to follow those little leagues and things of that nature. And he was just saying that the ward was actually so full that they were adding another wing on, and that was the time I had gone and it was in that surge. But it's a real virus, and I think everybody should, I know people are tired and they've dropped their guards a little bit, but wear the mask. It's not that hard. And now I wear the mask to believe, when I go out and I go to Dunwoody Country Club, you'll see me wear the mask. I wear the mask mainly because I'm more fearful of you. I really can't catch a cold right now because of the scarring. And I've tried to pick up some of my running. I can't run like I used to. I ran 3 miles 5 days before I was put on a vent. That running might take another year before I can ever pick back up on that. But my strength is coming back, but I'm not near where I was. But that's all part of being comatose in the body, basically. I mean, I didn't do anything with my body for 30 days. Then when I got home, they quarantined me again. I mean, I bet you between quarantining before and after in the hospital, I mean, I've been locked down for 40 something days. But they were very fearful in terms of who I was in contact with, where I was. I mean, I had a CDC person come in talking to me and everything. So, all right, I'm going to go mute if anybody's got any questions, but that's my story. And my old mutt, Lola, just came in and sneezed. So if you heard a noise, that was her.
Randolph, this is Andy Drexler. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I was wondering, did anyone else did any of your other family members get COVID from you? I mean,
knock on wood, no, nobody did. And actually, they picked one of the family members and asked them to come in to get a sample of an antibody. I mean, they're doing all this crazy stuff. So randomly, they selected my son, Ben, who's 21. He plays football at Furman. And Ben was like, me? And they said, yeah, they'd like to take him. And I guess maybe because of the age difference and he was here with me, because they had sent the kids home to go to school remote. That was like in the second week of March. And he does not have the antibodies. Oddly enough, guys, one of the things that they ask questions about so much, and I don't know if I've said this in the Pace Setters or some of the others, but I don't care. But they ask a lot about AIDS. A lot about AIDS. Do I know of anyone who has it? Do I know anyone that has tested positive? Have I been in a relationship with anyone that maybe had it or later was tested? All this stuff. And I'm like, why are y'all asking all these questions about AIDS? No, I don't know it. One of the things, there seems to be some correlation because AIDS, from what I'm understanding, affects the immune system and you die. COVID-19 affects the respiratory and then attacks the immune system and you die. There's some protein levels in these cells that have familiarity. And that was what one of, now these doctors like there at Emory at the teaching, I mean, they're like this Indian, I don't know, Mishuma or something, it's a name about that long. They all have names about that long. But he found it quite fascinating that it has some similarities. But more concerning is that, as he said, it has the ability to have wings on it. And I said, what does that mean? He said, well, from what we gather, AIDS is transmitted in bodily fluids. Air, it dies. These little guys have wings and fly 6 feet away, and they land and don't go away for 2 to 3 days. And so that's kind of how he visualized it to me. And that, so they do, if you're ever chosen to go into, be a part of their guinea pig program, and I don't think they like me saying that, but research program, they do ask a lot of those questions. And now I'm saying this, they didn't say this. Now I see why they keep saying 6 feet away, stay 6 feet away. But I did go to Costco last weekend and I saw this lady in front of me on the cell phone with a mask, and she's in a cart in front of me, pulls her mask down, sneezes on this cute Indian couple and puts her mask back up. And she just stayed on the phone, you know, but just know that the reason you got the mask on is so that bodily air or whatever, moisture or something does not hit the person next to you. That's the purpose of wearing the mask. Any other questions?
So Randolph, do you know how you contracted COVID-19? You know, I remember hearing you talk to the Gulf ministry, and you said you had plants in China. And
yeah, we have offices all over the world, and we have. Well, I'll tell you this. I work for a great group of people, and we have been in China 40 years. I'm in the poultry food trading business, right? And we're one of the largest U.S. poultry importers in China. And so back in November, we had these meetings via satellite, like we're doing a Zoom type similar program. And our offices over there had told us that there were thousands of people that had died, and as we got into more in December talking about the Chinese New Year, which would have been in January, some of them reported family members had passed away and that there could be thousands and thousands were dead. Not the 2,000 that they report and put on TV land, but they were tens of thousands, and they were very fearful. So our leaders of the company decided then that we would send everybody home in January. And every family member, my wife, my kids, everybody got 2 masks, and we've got, I think, 400 or 500 gloves in a box, and we had shields to wear. And they did that to all of us. My internet seems like it's messing up. They did that to all of us. And the reason being is that we knew what it was like when the SARS hit it in the late 1900s, the 1990s, and how many people died in China then. And so that's what we did. And we actually then we have 117 people here, and we sent them all home with laptops, set them up, put their computers, or purchase computers. So by February, before the CDC told us to put a mask on, well, they didn't really tell us to put mask on. They just said wipe the surface and wash your hands. We had everything we needed. The only way I could say that I'm possibly contracted is I'm a big Costco fan, and I was at Costco that particular day, the week before I came down with a fever, and there were a lot of people in there, thousands of people it seemed like, because people then started buying supplies, and I was there probably an hour and a half, and as a result, that's the only thing. And I mean that I could think where I was. And I did go over to Dunwoody Country Club and run on the treadmill. And when I was tested positive and I was able, they called my wife and told her, and Michelle thought it was important to call the club and tell them, but nobody caught it. Nobody in the neighborhood caught it. I don't know anybody at Costco caught it, but me.
Thank you.
And thanks for being here today. I appreciate it. And the story is really wonderful. But talk a minute, if you don't mind, about the day you came home, because I saw that great video on Facebook, and that was really neat. Talk a minute about that, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So Paige and Scott Ackaway and several of them, there's quite a few people in the church live on my street. Sue McConnell, Paige and Scott Ackaway, the Beavers, Tom Beaver and Lisa, the Birchies, the Geese. So, I mean, we almost could probably put a little chapel on this street. We've got a lot of Methodists, right? So there was when I got out of the hospital, unbeknownst to me, and the family picked me up, we're coming down the road, and all of a sudden I start seeing these people outside waving. One of them was a Jewish guy who always waves at me when I come home from work. Everybody's on the street with signs and clapping and all that. And it was just a big crowd. I mean, not just people on my street, but people from over in Paul's neighborhood, the Gephardts, just a lot of people all coming on the streets clapping. And I was really weak. I wasn't able to get out. I had, Ben had to help me, pick me up and help me get out of the car and get me into my bed. But it was a very humbling time to see the whole community with banners and signs, and that I survived. One thing I did note is that after I got to my bed and cut on, I didn't have any TV at that time for all those weeks. And I don't know why. I guess there probably was a TV in there, but I didn't. I just stayed so sick. But it was pretty interesting when I really was putting things together. I cut TV on and I saw that the government had shut down and we had spent $2 trillion. And I'm like, Michelle, is that really true on TV that's on there? And she's like, yeah, everybody's, everything, restaurant, bars, everything is shut down. So it was kind of an interesting time for me. But the parade was really beautiful, of people all coming together and clapping, and it just shows again the power of prayer really does work. I mean, people take it lightly and say, "Oh, I'm going to pray for you," or, you know, "You're on my prayer list." Well, it really does work, and I'm a true testimony to the power of prayer through Dunwoody Methodist, through the Marist brothers and priests, through just tons of people the Jewish community, they're just all really, there's a lot of really good people out there. And I wish people would decorate some of these little quiet blessings, like the nurse and And these doctors too, they cared a lot. I've got a lot of good things to say about Northside and their nurses. And they even called you afterwards to make sure that they met my needs and customer service. And I'm like, wow. But I spent a lot of money. I think it was right at $900,000. Here I am. So I'm almost $1 million man. Any other questions?
Randolph, I just wanted to ask, what was the regimen you said family had to be on? It was vitamin C and what else? And
Yeah,
they wanted
yeah.
people they wanted to boost everybody's immune system. And is that, I guess my next question would be, is that a good recommendation for us just in general, through this?
That's a really good question. I mean, again, I'm not a doctor and so forth, but that's what the infectious disease team insisted on for my family. And I would probably recommend that. I don't see that there's nothing wrong with it. I think if it's good for them, it's good for you too. But if you look at both of those vitamins, they focus a lot on the immune system. One thing they did to also mention is they weren't encouraging me to get a suntan and get burned, but they asked that Michelle wheel me outside and warm my back with sun or have a little bit of the sunlight. I think as one of the doctors there, she was a Filipino, she was really good. She said it builds the natural nutrients of the vitamin D. And it's kind of funny because I took care of a great aunt and great uncle, and he lived to be 102 and she lived to be 100, but they would sit on their Florida room, as they call it, down in Savannah, and like to have the sun shine a little bit on their back and so forth. And those old remedies, here we are now, all these years later, is what you hear doctors telling you to do. They say it's healthy. Again, not to get the skin cancer, but healthy to do that. The fresh air and the warming of the sun. So yeah, vitamin C, 1,500 milligram, and the vitamin D, you should have at least around 5,000. Any other questions?
Randolph, this is Phil Schrader. It's
Hey.
nice to meet you on Zoom. I've been praying for you before I even knew your name. Dan told me that there was somebody in the church but didn't want to share the person's name, to protect your confidentiality until he knew where you were on having it shared. But we're going to have some outside services, kind of bring your own communion elements, but we'll also supply some on Sunday night. And we have a meeting this afternoon to prayerfully consider going back into the sanctuary. Do you have any advice for us? I think masks have to be mandatory. I think that for any of our family members in the church who are some type physically, here's the scary part of me, and I'm just going to tell you, I never smoked. I ran, I weightlifted, I did squats. I was in my opinion, or their opinion to the teams of doctors, a very healthy 57-year-old man. I'd never taken high blood pressure medicine, cholesterol medicine. I do drink. I don't think I drink excessively, but I'll have a beer with you. But that's pretty much it. It's like the Filipino doctor, and I can't remember her name offhand. She was good. She said, "You are about as vanilla as you get it." And I said, "Yeah, I am." There was nothing. So getting back to if anybody feels that they are, some sort of medical conditions, I wouldn't go back. I would encourage them not to. I would encourage the mask needs to be mandatory. And I think you need to have some sense of distancing, and you'd say, well, if I'm a husband and wife, do I still need to be distanced when we're in the same area? Well, I don't know. I'm the safest, to be honest with you, as all these doctors at Emory say. They keep saying, you're the man that you need to invite to the party because you don't have to wear the mask at all. I just don't want to catch a cold, and I wear the mask because it's more sociably acceptable. But I can't imagine me having a cold right now, even with I'm raspy as it is now. What it would be like trying to cough. It'd be horrible. So no, I really don't. I did. One of my very good friends is a deacon in a Greek church down by Emory, and I talked with him yesterday. And Dimitri is about 70 years old, and he was saying that they were already back in church, but they were doing a staggered services, limiting the number of people in the sanctuary. I think keeping the doors open and air is good. That air stuff is a big hit, because when you're in the ward, the room is like a vacuum or suction. Everything in there was going to stay in there even after they left in their little Star Wars suits. I mean, everybody looked like Star Wars in there. But I think you need ventilation for sure. Fresh air coming through. I would stagger. I would confine the number of people, and I would mandatory everybody has to wear a mask, and then encourage those that are physically are have some ailments not to come.
Thank you. The struggle that I'm having is that many of our really faithful people, even some of our ushers, are in some of those vulnerable age categories. And I sure appreciate their faithfulness. And, for some mental health reasons, some people need to be back in the community of faith. But I want us to be safe. And if somebody as young and as strong as you are can have it take so much out of them, I worry about what would happen with somebody that has any sort of thing that's compromised. So thank you for your witness today, and I look forward to meeting you in person. I know you're safe. I hope I am. So I look forward to seeing you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think if you just need the air ventilation, it's very important, because remember, the little guy has wings. That's what the gentleman at the medical hospital said. And the more air you have, you keep it air flowing. You see some people doing church services a lot outside too. And I think that goes to why having the air is important.
Well, Randolph, once again, thank you for being with us here this morning. This has been a wonderful story, and thanks for your time. So let's close in prayer, if you don't mind. Gracious God, we know that you're a healing God, Lord. We're just grateful to have Randolph here and to tell his story, and again, to affirm just how much of a healing God you are. Be with us as we go this week, Lord, and help us to carry your message to everybody that we meet this week, Lord. And all these things we ask in your name. Amen. Thanks, Randolph.
Randolph, you don't wear a mask in the house there, do you?
No, no. I don't wear. I found out something that you and I have in common. We collect clocks.